racing is adrenaline, split-second decisions, and engineering pushed to the ragged edge, and sometimes those edges tear away into tragedy. These are 5 of the most horrific on-track deaths in motorsport history. Brief, brutal incidents that left families, fans, and the entire racing series shaken, and that often triggered safety overhauls. It was supposed to be just another race weekend, with engines screaming through the hills of Imola. Fans had poured in under the bright Italian sun for one reason: to witness Ayrton Senna da Silva, the Brazilian genius, the 3-time world champion, the man who didn't just drive Formula One cars, he tamed them. To millions, Senna wasn't a racer. He was a force of nature, a symbol of courage so fierce it bordered on myth. But on that Sunday, May 1st, 1994, the myth met mortality, and the sport's heartbeat simply stopped. Even before the main event began, something about that weekend felt wrong, almost cursed. On Friday, Senna's close friend Rubens Barrichello slammed into the barriers at 225 km/h, his car cartwheeling like a rag doll. Senna sprinted to the medical center, pacing, shaking, only calming when Barrichello finally opened his eyes. It was one of the few moments of relief that weekend would allow, because the next day, tragedy struck again. During qualifying on Saturday, Austrian rookie Roland Ratzenberger hit the wall at over 300 km/h after his front wing snapped clean off. The impact was so violent it killed him instantly. When Sid Watkins, Formula One's chief doctor, told Senna the news, the champion didn't respond. Not with words, at least. His face fell, and tears filled his eyes. Watkins, seeing his friend unravel, begged him to quit. "Let's go fishing," he said. "Forget this." But Senna only whispered back, "I can't stop." Racing wasn't a job to him. It was the pulse in his veins. That night, he called his girlfriend, Adriana Galisteo, and finally let the fear spill out. He talked about the crashes, the dread, the sense that something terrible was coming. Yet, when the sun rose on Sunday morning, he put on the calm face of a champion. Over breakfast, he even reconciled with his old rival, Alain Prost, discussing plans to revive the Drivers' Association and make racing safer. It was as if he knew he wouldn't get another chance. Then the race began, and the chaos followed instantly. JJ Leto stalled on the grid. Pedro Lamy smashed into him, sending metal fragments flying into the stands. Spectators were hurt. Panic rippled. The safety car came out, but it was too slow, forcing Senna to crawl behind it as his tires cooled, losing precious heat, losing grip, losing stability. When the green flag finally returned, there was a moment where everything felt normal again. Williams roared. The crowd rose. Senna flew. But on lap 7, everything changed. As he thundered through Tamburello, the fastest corner at Imola, the steering column of his car snapped without warning. At 309 km/h, Williams shot straight off the track. The grass didn't slow it. The concrete wall didn't move. The impact was catastrophic. 211 km/h to 0 in a heartbeat. The front wheel broke free. The suspension exploded. A metal suspension arm tore into Senna's helmet. For a few agonizing seconds, millions watching around the world waited for him to move. A hand, a wave, anything. But there was only stillness. Sid Watkins reached him first. "When I lifted his eyelids," he later said, "I knew." Senna had suffered a fatal brain injury, and when they lifted him from the wreckage, Watkins felt his friend sigh, as if his soul had left his body. At 6:37 p.m. in Bologna's Maggiore Hospital, Ayrton Senna da Silva was gone. When the news reached Brazil, time seemed to stop. Millions lined the streets. His coffin, wrapped in the national flag, moved through São Paulo like a slow heartbeat. People cried openly. His death forced Formula One to change. Stronger car structures, safer tracks, faster medical response. For 20 years afterward, no driver would lose their life in an F1 race. The world remembers Ayrton Senna's tragic death at Imola, but what many forget is that the nightmare began the day before, with a man who never got the chance to become a legend. Roland Ratzenberger wasn't a superstar, wasn't a champion, wasn't a household name. He was something purer, a dreamer who fought for more than a decade through obscurity, debt and heartbreak, just for a shot, one shot, at racing in Formula One. And on April 30th, 1994, during qualifying for the San Marino Grand Prix, that dream ended in a single, devastating instant. Roland had come a long way from the quiet streets of Salzburg. He wasn't born into wealth or privilege. He built his life the hard way, hanging around Walter Lechner's workshop as a teenager, fixing cars, sweeping floors, learning everything he could. By 18, he joined Lechner's racing school. By his early 20s, he was clawing his way through Formula Ford, then touring cars, then Formula 3000, then Japanese prototypes, then Le Mans. Nothing came easily. Every contract was fragile. Every season was a gamble. Every race was a fight to be noticed. But Roland never stopped. He kept chasing speed across continents, believing, truly believing, that he would one day reach Formula One. And in 1994, unbelievably, impossibly, he finally did. A small team, Simtech, gave him a chance. Not a competitive car, not a winning team, but a seat, a place on the grid. Proof that after more than a decade, he had made it. His debut didn't go perfectly. He failed to qualify in Brazil. But in the next race in Japan, he fought from the very back of the grid all the way to 11th. For a rookie in a car barely capable of finishing races, it was a small miracle. In Imola, he wanted more. His sponsor was attending for the first time. Halfway through his 5-race deal, he needed to impress. He needed to prove he belonged. And he knew he had to push. But Imola, in 1994, felt cursed. On Friday, Roland watched Rubens Barrichello's horrific crash and waited anxiously for news. The next day, he strapped himself into his Simtech, determined to qualify and determined to push right on the limit. Early in the session, he ran wide at Ac Minerali. The off-track moment didn't look serious, so Roland checked the car as best he could and kept going. But something unseen had already been broken. His front wing, weakened by the earlier mistake, was hanging on by just a breath. And then came the moment that made time freeze. At over 300 km/h, he threw the car into the Villeneuve corner. The wing failed. It snapped clean off, jammed beneath the chassis, and in an instant, Roland became a passenger in a machine he could no longer control. The car went straight. No turning, no chance. A violet flash of Simtech purple shot off the track and slammed into a concrete wall at a speed no human body could survive. The impact destroyed everything. Within seconds, the world knew. Within minutes, the paddock fell silent. Roland had suffered fatal skull injuries, the kind that end life instantly. Formula One had not seen a driver die during a Grand Prix weekend in 12 years. Some younger mechanics had never experienced it at all. And when Bernie Ecclestone delivered the news to the Simtech garage, everyone broke. David Brabham, Roland's teammate, was so shaken he barely remembered the rest of the day. Ayrton Senna rushed to the medical center. When Sid Watkins, the legendary F1 doctor, told him Roland had died, Senna cried. Watkins begged him to skip the race, to quit, to walk away. But Senna shook his head and whispered, "I cannot stop." Hours later, Senna withdrew from qualifying. Roland's grid spot was left empty. The next day, Senna himself would die. Roland's death, though overshadowed by the loss of a global icon, still left a deep wound. At Roland's funeral, only 5 drivers came. Most were already back in the whirlwind of racing, of obligations, of moving forward. Max Mosley, the FIA president, chose to attend Roland's funeral instead of Senna's. His explanation was simple and heartbreaking. Everyone went to Senna's. I thought it was important that somebody went to Roland's. Tom Pryce never knew that the race he started at Kyalami in 1977 would be the last moment of his life, because what killed Tom Pryce wasn't a mechanical failure, a dangerous corner, or even another car. It was something far more horrifying. A moment of human instinct colliding with 270 km/h of unstoppable force. His father was a police officer, his mother a nurse. As a boy, he drove a baker's van at 10, dreaming of speed, dreaming of touching the same glory as his hero Jim Clark. He cried when Clark died. He cried again when Jochen Rindt was killed. But the danger never scared him. It called to him. He fought through the ranks the hard way. Formula Ford, Formula 3, anything that had wheels and a chance. By 1974, he made it to Formula One, first with Token, then Shadow. By 1975, he had his first podium, his first pole, and a stunning win at the Race of Champions, becoming the one and only Welsh driver to win a Formula One race. People who knew racing could see it clearly. He wasn't just good, he was special. And in 1977, at the South African Grand Prix, he was flying again. In wet practice, he set the fastest time of anyone, quicker even than Niki Lauda. It looked like the race might be his comeback moment, but race day would turn that promise into horror. Tom made a bad start, dropping to last, but he began carving his way back up the field with quiet determination. By lap 22, he had climbed 9 places. He was focused, smooth, gaining momentum. Ahead of him, his teammate Renzo Zorzi pulled off the track. Fuel leaked onto the engine and caught fire. A small fire, but enough to panic 2 young marshals on the opposite side of the track. One of them was 19-year-old Frederik Frikkie Janssen van Vuuren, only a teenager, only seconds from death. Without radio communication, without authorization, the marshals ran across the track, blind to the fact that Formula One cars were approaching at full throttle, cresting a rise that completely hid them until the last second. The first marshal barely made it across. The second never had a chance. Hans-Joachim Stuck came over the hill first and saw them. He swerved right, missing the first marshal by inches, but right behind him, just a heartbeat behind, came Tom Pryce. And from where Tom was sitting, tucked into Stuck's slipstream, he could not see the teenager until the very last fraction of a second. There was no space, no time, no warning. At 270 km/h, Tom's shadow hit the young marshal with unimaginable force. Janssen van Vuuren was thrown into the air, killed instantly, his body almost unrecognizable. The fire extinguisher he carried, 18 kilograms of steel, exploded into Tom's helmet with such violent impact that it tore the extinguisher high over the grandstand and into the parking lot. Tom never even had time to know it happened. He died instantly, but the car, still at full throttle, kept going. With its driver already dead, the shadow continued down the straight like a ghost, bouncing off barriers, smashing through a service entrance, and finally colliding head-on with Jacques Lafitte's Ligier at Crowthorne Corner. Marshals ran toward the wreck, confused, unsure which driver had survived, if any had. It took time before they realized one of the marshals was missing, and only then did they understand the full scale of what had happened. On the podium, Niki Lauda celebrated a victory, his first since his near-fatal crash the year before, until a quiet official stepped in and told him the truth. "There is no joy after that," Lauda said, the celebration dying in his throat. In Wales, in Kent, in every corner of the racing world, people who knew Tom Pryce broke. His wife Nella, whom he had married only 2 years earlier, his parents, who had watched their boy rise so far from so little, his team, still shaking from the shock. Tom was buried in the same church where he had stood smiling in his wedding suit not long before. On February 18, 2001, at Daytona International Speedway, millions expected a celebration. Dale Earnhardt Sr., the most feared and respected man in NASCAR, was defending the perfect finish for the 2 cars ahead of him, Michael Waltrip and his son Dale Earnhardt Jr. Nobody knew they were watching his final lap. Earnhardt wasn't just another driver. He was the driver. 7 championships, 76 wins, and a presence that intimidated the entire field. That day, he wasn't chasing glory for himself. He was blocking, defending, and doing everything he could to deliver a dream ending for his team. The race had already been brutal. A massive crash on lap 173 destroyed nearly half the field. Earnhardt escaped, but he radioed a chilling warning. "Richard, if they don't do something to these cars, it's gonna end up killing somebody." It sounded almost prophetic. As the white flag waved, Waltrip and Earnhardt Jr. led the race. Behind them, Earnhardt fought off Sterling Marlin and Ken Schroeder in a 180mm knife fight. Then, turn 4, the final corner. Marlin tapped Earnhardt's left rear. A tiny touch at full speed. The number 3 snapped sideways, slid up the track, and crossed directly into Schroeder's path. Schroeder slammed into him. A second later, Earnhardt's black Chevrolet hit the concrete wall head-on at nearly 160 mph. No fire, no explosion, just a violent stop that made the crowd go silent. Schroeder climbed out, looked into Earnhardt's car, and immediately signaled for help. He later admitted he knew instantly Dale was gone. Waltrip won the Daytona 500. Earnhardt Jr. finished second. But victory lane felt hollow. Minutes later, NASCAR President Mike Helton delivered the sentence no one thought they'd ever hear. "We've lost Dale Earnhardt. A basilar skull fracture, instant, fatal." The shock shook NASCAR to its core. Black Sunday, the Intimidator, the man who survived everything, was suddenly gone. But his death forced the sport to change. The hands device became mandatory. Safer barriers were installed everywhere. Car design, seats, belts, every safety standard was rebuilt from the ground up. Since then, no driver in NASCAR's top 3 series has died during a race. Dale Earnhardt saved lives by losing his own. That final quiet crash in Turn 4 still echoes today, because everyone remembers where they were when the black number 3 hit the wall, and when the Intimidator never climbed out again. It was Halloween morning, 1999, the final race of the kart season, the Marlboro 500 at California Speedway. For Greg Moore, the 24-year-old Canadian phenom with movie star charisma and terrifying speed, this wasn't just another race. It was supposed to be his last drive with Forsyth Racing before moving to Roger Penske's legendary team. A new chapter, a bigger future, everything ahead of him. But before the engines ever started, something felt wrong. The day before the race, as sunlight cut through the paddock, Moore was riding his motor scooter toward the hospitality area. Out of nowhere, a vehicle blinded by the rising sun clipped him, knocking him violently to the ground. It seemed like a freak accident. Small, unlucky, forgettable, but the damage was real. A deep hand laceration requiring 15 stitches, a fractured index finger, a bruised hip, pain that would have sidelined most drivers. Moore refused that option. Doctors hesitated, teams scrambled, and Forsyth even brought in an emergency backup driver. But after a test session, medical consultations, and a specially modified steering wheel, Moore was cleared to start the race. He would drive with a brace. He would start from the back of the grid. And he would do it hurt. Fans didn't know it then, but they were watching a man race through pain that would have broken others. The race began with chaos. An early crash brought out a long caution, the field crawling slowly around the massive 2-mile oval. When the race finally resumed, Moore started slicing forward, his car twitching as he fought both the track and his own injured hand. Then came lap 10. Moore was running 15th, tucked in the draft, pushing more than 220 a nut. Somewhere in the middle of turn 2, his car suddenly wiggled a small slide, barely visible, but enough to start a disaster no one could stop. Some believe he lost the slipstream. Others think the damp patch of grass he'd skimmed earlier unsettled the car. The truth is still debated. What's certain is this: once the car broke loose, nothing could bring it back. Moore spun across the track, leaving long black skid marks, helpless as the car shot toward the infield grass at a speed most cars only touch in straight lines. The grass wasn't flat, an access road cut through it, slightly lower than the ground around it. When Moore's rear wheels hit that drop, the car launched into the air like it had been kicked by a giant. It lifted. It twisted, and then Greg Moore, strapped into a light, open cockpit machine, went airborne at over 220 miles. He barrel-rolled violently, slammed into an unprotected concrete barrier at a perfect 90-degree angle, and the impact registered a staggering 154 G. The car didn't just break apart, it exploded into pieces. Debris flew everywhere. The cockpit area disintegrated. Moore's helmet struck the ground again and again before what was left of the car landed upside down, spinning to a silent, horrifying stop. Track workers ran. Medics climbed in. CPR began instantly. A helicopter was summoned. No one at the Speedway needed to be told this was bad. Moore was airlifted to Loma Linda University Medical Center, but the crash forces were beyond survivability. At 1:21 p.m., doctors pronounced Greg Moore dead from catastrophic head and internal injuries. He was just 24 years old. Back at the track, officials lowered every flag to half-staff. Drivers weren't told until the race ended. There was no celebration, no champagne, only silence and disbelief. Fans cried. Crew members stood motionless. The racing world felt the loss immediately, not just of a driver, but of a future superstar whose talent seemed unlimited. Memorials appeared overnight. Thousands of fans lined up to sign condolence books. Schools, dealerships, churches, places more once passed through quietly became gathering spots for people struggling to understand how a rising star could vanish in seconds. CART impounded the wreckage and launched a full investigation. Engineers tore apart every piece, analyzed data, reviewed footage. After weeks of study, they arrived at a conclusion no one wanted to hear. There was no single cause, no mechanical failure, no obvious mistake, just a chain of tiny, unpredictable moments that ended with a perfect storm of tragedy.